I want to welcome everyone to the December meeting of the Environmental Stewardship Committee. Before we get started, I would like to introduce two new and returning committee members. The first one is Aidan Helt, who is a student representative from University of Washington, Tacoma. Welcome, Aidan. And the second is Bruce Ballack, who is a professor emeritus on the Seattle campus, but he's here as the representative of the Faculty Council on Universities and Facilities and Services. Bruce has attended Environmental Stewardship Committee meetings before, so he's well known by the rest of us. So welcome, Bruce. We appreciate your participation.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Bruce.
Hello. Hi, Lou.
Hi, Bruce. Good to see you.
You too.
Today we'll begin in a few seconds with Lou Carrillo. He'll provide an overview, but what we're going to hear today are from the action plan owners for targets 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7. And I believe the schedule is set for each action plan owner to have 15 minutes, but we're asking each presenter to limit his or her comments to about 8 minutes, to provide at least 7 for members of the committee to interact, ask questions, respond, because that's a big part of what we're trying to do today. And Claudia is the timekeeper. She's the policeman who will keep us on track to make sure that we stay within the times allowed. And so now please welcome Lou to provide some comments. Lou?
Thanks, John, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin this morning with a land acknowledgement. And I'll start off by saying the University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Excuse me. So today's meeting, as John mentioned, we're going to touch on 5 target action owners. And following our last ESC meeting, this will conclude our first full round of rotations through all 10 target actions. We'll meet again next in February, and that will start round 2 of our updates from each of the target action owners. I want to start off by just saying I'm really pleased with the progress that we've made, and just take a moment here to acknowledge that it's December. Welcome to December, everybody. Time flies in some ways, but it's dragged on in many ways, especially this year. 2020 has been a nutty year and a really difficult year. But here at the end of 2020, let's take a moment to think about what we've done so far. We've come a long way. We've made a lot of progress in the sustainability arena for the University of Washington. We've organized well, and we've gained momentum that I think is going to make 2021 the best year University of Washington has ever seen with regard to pursuing sustainability initiatives. So as difficult as it has been for all of us, let's acknowledge that, but let's also look ahead with excitement as we hear about vaccine being exported, hopefully approved maybe as early as next week, and then starting with distribution. That's something to look forward to. It's going to take some time. We're going to be operating in this environment for quite a while longer. We know that, but it's good to see the light at the end of that tunnel. And think about in the sustainability arena, building on the momentum we've gained in 2021 and 2020 to make 2021 a wonderful year. So I thank you all for your involvement there. As we go through today, and I want to thank Elst, or Torin Elst, Kyle McDermott, sorry, Torin, Marilyn Ostergren, Gary Handwork, George Donegan, and Corinne Wallin, who will be briefing the 5 target actions today. But I'd ask the members of the Environmental Stewardship Committee to think as we continue to encourage you, think about what feedback you can provide, what guidance, insights you have, how you can contribute to these actions that we're pursuing, and figure out if there's a way that you can do your part to help move these initiatives along. So I'll pause there and thank you all for your participation. But let's get to it. Claudia, over to you to introduce the first target action owner.
Great, thanks, Lou. I'll go ahead and introduce Torin Elste from our group. We also have a member of that engagement group, Cheryl Wheeler from Continuum College, with us today. So they have been teaming up, and Torin will be sharing a report out. We'll do 2-minute warnings on chat. So take it away, Torin.
Awesome. Thank you, Claudia. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. So hi, I'm Torin, and I am working on the engagement team. So the metric is to double staff, student and faculty sustainability engagement by 2024. We have been able to collect some baseline metrics, specifically with the whole U through our green certifications program, which was as of June 2020, and then the Continuum College as well. And I think that Cheryl's on, so anything related to Continuum College, Cheryl, feel free to jump in if needed. So Whole U recently hosted a sustainability challenge. We had about 500 participants in that. So we got some pretty good engagement with that. Green certifications, we have 94 labs and offices certified. And then the Continuum College has 2 community programs identified to add sustainability kind of curriculum. So let's see, what was done to improve upon the baseline metric? We collected existing data that we had from past events, and we are reaching out to departments to kind of see who else is doing engagement that we can also add to our list. I have a whole spreadsheet going where we track kind of metrics and participation in sustainability related events. We also have included UW Bothell and Tacoma in that as well. So they are tracking kind of their own sustainability and DE&I related engagements. And then we are having a collective kind of tracking as well, because this is a tri-campus plan. And then some challenges that we've encountered is, when we've reached out to departments, they're maybe not this time of year, but they've been really busy, especially like with fall quarter. People were quite, didn't have much bandwidth to kind of help us. So by asking them to add more work to their already existing work was kind of problematic. So what we would like to do to overcome that challenge is to approach this through incremental wins and ask for continued UW leadership support for the plan. Let's see, a couple of risks. Much of the green certifications data was collected, sort of pre-COVID. And that really ended in March. We haven't quite figured out how to collect that data from working from home. It's based upon, greening your office and lab on campus. So that's a challenge that we've kind of had, and we're trying to figure out how to overcome that. So if anyone has ideas, please share. And then also maintaining the visibility of actions in a virtual way has been another challenge that we've kind of encountered. So we've all heard about, Zoom fatigue. So, asking people to participate in yet another event online, it's been difficult. I think probably at the beginning, it was a little easier, but since we've all been working remote for several months now, it's definitely been a challenge. So next quarter, first quarter of 2021. What we are planning is to develop a baseline which continues to track engagement across all 3 campuses, and really work on defining a definition of what engagement means to the university and across all 3 campuses. And then we would also like to begin scoping a plan for professional development and new hires as well. So those are a couple of the things for next quarter. Let's see. I think I probably talked a little bit too quickly, but at this point, I would love to answer any questions anyone might have, comments, things like that. So yeah, feel free to ask away.
And there's also the chat box. I want to remind folks. I know you all aren't shy. Just takes 1 or 2 folks to start.
Well, can I make a comment here?
Yes.
Last night, thanks to Gary Handberg, I was invited to sit in on the presentations of the graduating students in the program of the environment. And I want to tell you, I was just enthralled. So that's an example of learning at its very best. It uses the apprenticeship model rather than the classroom model, which is absolutely the way to go. These students have networked all over the place with people who might provide job opportunities. This is extraordinary. And while it probably fits better under a different one of our committees, I just want to point out that these students are engaged, and they're going to be engaged in sustainability for a long time to go. Gary, great program. Thank you.
Can I borrow that as a segue, actually? Because I've been using an adjective more in my thinking about environmental issues, deep. And I'd like to add that adjective here. There are 2 words here that I think really need to be pressed on. One is engagement. There's engagement that can be superficial. There's engagement that can bring in people who are already committed to whatever issue you're working on. Deep engagement, I think, involves spreading out in the way that Bruce kindly said our students are effective in doing. That seems to me really important. Second, for this group, unpacking the numbers in the sense of staff are incredibly engaged across campus in these issues, a whole bunch of them in a whole bunch of different units. A number of students are. Faculty are largely tuned out. That's a very particular issue, I think, that needs to be addressed.
We have a question here from Jeremy, actually, and that is a really good one that speaks to that, Gary. A question for Torin and the group about the professional development and opportunities that are stated in the plan and what those could look like and how we can help inform that piece of the action. Do you want to talk through that, Torin? I'm happy to chime in too.
Yeah, feel free to chime in, Claudia and Cheryl. Thank you, Jeremy. Great question. So we are reaching out to the pod group to see if we can get sustainability related curriculum as a professional development course. And then also other opportunities for professional development. They are through the Continuum College, and Cheryl has outlined a bunch of different ways that we as a UW community can connect with sustainability and DE&I work. And Claudia, if you want to jump in with more, feel free.
I don't, you did a great job. I'm going to give it to Cheryl to talk through some of the programs that she's identified through Continuum, actually.
Yeah.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. So we have 2 main programs that we identified as being, the straightforward targets for this year, and it's the Summer Youth Program and the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute program. Summer Youth, we really haven't been able to do anything with because, we started talking about it in the summer when they were already running their programs, and then they're going to be more, programs next year, but it's on the agenda to include a number of really interesting offerings for next summer. So I think that will look great, but we won't really see that until next summer. I think that's sort of the timeline of things in general. Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, they were really excited to start offering content immediately, and they already had 2 events so far this year that have gone well. I think there were about 140 people altogether for those 2 events. We have a lot of other professional development programs that are like certificate programs or degree programs or standalone courses that are for professionals, and some of them already include sustainability content. I've been working with the program managers to introduce more sustainability content, and some of them have been a little bit like, it's already good as it is. We don't need to add any more content. So I think it'll be a little bit more of a step-by-step process to get that worked in. I was able to get one instructor to add really great sustainability modules to our, it's called the Global Business Certificate program. So that was really great, although that was sort of that wasn't part of it. It wasn't part of a goal. It just happened anyway. So things are moving. We'll just see them happening incrementally.
Awesome. Thanks,
Hey,
Cheryl.
Torin, I'd like to go back to the engagement point that was made earlier. And I'm not clear on what the numbers are today in the baseline metric. I see some numbers there, but we're looking to double the numbers, and I agree with the comment that engagement matters. How I guess that's my question, is how are we measuring an increase in engagement, staff, faculty, students?
Yeah, so that is a great question, Lou. One of the things that we have been really focusing on since July, since the plan rolled out, was just collecting some numbers so that we had something to work off of, so that we can make sure that we are increasing engagement as the years move along. So what we're hoping is that, and I'm sure these numbers will change when we're back on campus. So there might be a couple hiccups there, but at this point we have these numbers. By 2024, we're hoping to, hopefully double, triple them. So these numbers were really just the initial sort of data set that we wanted to gather to make sure that we're sort of on track, moving along and making sure that we're reaching goals.
Torin, is this where you have a program on the environment capstone student looking at, because one of the things that has always been tough with this is that the plan didn't actually define what engagement was. And so it's been difficult for us as an office and Torin's group to kind of determine what that is. So they took those numbers because those are some of the existing data we have, but Torin also is getting a capstone student to help look and kind of look at a broader, essentially helping us define a baseline and looking at this more broadly. So I think in the next report, hopefully Torin will have a little more solid baseline of a more broad number. So these are the ones that we're starting just because they were some of the numbers that we had that were already really solid, but that is one of the pieces that we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks. I just emphasize the sooner we have a baseline number, and if we want to just start with these numbers here, I think that's fine too. So the idea is we want to go to 1,000, 188 and 4. But how do we declare that we now have 4 programs? And is there a way to declare that we've engaged laboratories and offices at a certain level to declare that we're at 95, 96, and 97? Again, I know that's a little bit micro detail, but I think it's important to just, as we do the things that we're doing to increase engagement, that we have some way to understand whether or not what we're doing is having a positive impact.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, just kind of tag onto that is that it's been, I've had a lot of conversations with Torrin. I know Torrin's had a lot of conversations with other people. We want to make sure that we understand that these numbers here don't really capture the breadth of sustainability engagement on campus. And so we've talked, there's things like just, the number of people who are looking at, things like UW sustainability website or get orientation, the first year programs and new hires get some sustainability information. So we've been trying to figure out how do we, capture all of that meaningfully. And so that's still what we're kind of working on. But I think that that's really what Torrin's group in our office has been taking on and is still wrestling with some of those questions. But we hope to really solidify it by the next time that this group reports.
I'd like to acknowledge a question on the chat, and we have 2 minutes, so unfortunately need to keep us going. Mia asked a really good question on how we are keeping equity and inclusion at the center of the work for the plan. We have been in partnership with the College of the Environment, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office in ensuring that we are keeping engagement levels and visibility and participation with folks doing work on sustainability and D&I across UW. We've started quarterly sort of gatherings, but they were also part of shaping the plan as part of the development work on identifying ways to make sure we're taking action on diversity, equity, and inclusion into the different target areas. So they were also there as a lens to be able to review the content as we were keeping it going. And happy to also share more on that. We do have, and I'll ask for one final last question until I move us forward. Okay, and before we get to target 2, I would like to also welcome Professor Indranil Ganguly, who is serving as the Environmental Stewardship Committee representative for College of the Environment. So hello, Professor Ganguly, welcome, and very happy to have you join this committee. So we're going to go ahead and move on to, let's see, we're within a minute, but I think we're a little bit over the 15 allotted because Lou gave us back a minute or 2 as he is generous with the time. So I'll go ahead and now hand it over to Kyle McDermott and Marilyn Ostergren to talk about some other really good conversations we'll have in the academics and research portion. So Kyle.
Thanks, Claudia. Great to see you all and great to be here today. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and just jump in and kind of just give a brief overview about what we'll cover today with this update. And then I'm going to hand it over to Marilyn since her work is very pertinent and kind of the framework for target 2. And then I'll come back in and talk about some of the other targeted activities. So just from looking at the left hand of this page under target action. So we have adopt a university-wide definition of sustainability, develop standard reporting of academic content, identify minimum learning outcomes, and determine feasibility of a student sustainability hub. So we've made some progress, particularly on the first target activity, and Marilyn has graciously stepped in to help out as a faculty lecturer herself. She's really well situated to kind of help lead that effort. So I'm going to pass over to Marilyn and have her give us an update on that, on her work there.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so I just came on board in October to help with this effort. So we have a core group of faculty, staff, and students who are working on this. And then also, so before I came on board, and I think Kyle was heavily involved in identifying a faculty advisory group that includes faculty from across the disciplines and all 3 campuses. So we're focusing on this challenge of adopting a university-wide definition of sustainability as sort of the basis for some of the other actions that require us to understand what we mean by sustainability. And one of the things we've done to start this is come up with a list of things we want this definition and framework to achieve. So it's not just a linguistic effort, it's actually coming up with a definition that can help us drive action. So the list is, one is a tool for engagement. So we want this definition to encourage people to challenge and think about sustainability by the fact that we put it out there. And related is as a way of deepening our understanding. So we want a definition that will encourage all of us to think deeply about what sustainability means. Another is to help us have a common understanding, so we aren't, to the degree that's possible, we aren't talking at cross purposes, because we don't mean the same thing when we use the phrase sustainability. Another one is as a tool for measuring our achievement. So when we look at all of our sustainability action plan actions, we can say, are we being sure this is aligned with what we understand sustainability to be? And then finally, related is a tool for identifying research and education that we want to count as sustainability related. So we have that basis. We want to be sure that this definition and framework we come up with can help us achieve those goals. And then what we've done is started looking at definitions that are already out there. So definitions that other universities use, definitions that are explored in literature, definitions other people and other agencies have come up with, and looking for common themes. And then also how they align with the core principles that we identified in the Sustainability Action Plan. And so the plan is, once we have that in place, and we're getting close to that, the core group will meet and discuss, how these definitions we find align with, or how they whether they help us meet those goals we set out. And then we'll bring it to the larger advisory group. And also the goal is very much to have broad participation in this. So we want to be sure that anyone who wants to engage is invited to do so. Also, we're very aware that there's no opportunity for, universal buy-in and perfection here, but we can meet a lot of our goals even just in the effort to come up with a definition and work with a definition. And then I have a couple of questions for the ESC, but Kyle, I want to be sure to give you a chance to weigh in as well.
Sure, yeah, I'll just spend just a couple more, 2 or 3 more minutes talking about some of the other target actions, and then we'll open it up for questions. So yeah, thank you, Marilyn. And just to kind of add a little bit and emphasize Mia's earlier question with this faculty advisory group, one of the things that we really prioritize with reaching out to these faculty are really coming at this foundationally from a really open and broad lens to sustainability. So we've reached out to faculty within American Ethnic Studies, American Indigenous Studies, the College of Built Environment, Public Health. So we really did not want to just pigeonhole ourselves into a very, biased definition of sustainability, but really want to be expansive in inclusion in that process. So we have a really amazing group together so far, faculty from across the university. And then just quickly going through some of these other pieces here. So developing standard reporting of academic content. We're currently in the process of reviewing the platform used for STARS and determining if this is sufficient or what is missing from this methodology. So the framework will help really help us identify, are there gaps here based on kind of what's unique to UW. STARS is a global framework, but there are going to be nuances within the UW community that we may really want to own in on. And then as far as identifying minimum learning outcomes, again, this is something that the faculty advisory group will help to inform. We're also collaborating, the UW Sustainability Office is collaborating with the program in the Environment Sustainability Studio in winter quarter to have students perform benchmarking of other peer universities. So a great way to get students involved in that process. And then lastly, determining the feasibility of the Student Sustainability Hub. We've had some really great conversations with actually the CSF committee, GPSS, and ASUW, and started to actually reach out to other schools, including the University of Oregon, and really understanding what's out there, what models are already established and proven to be successful. And again, really, the idea of this hub is not to just recreate what we already have at the university, is to create something that really centers environmental, social, and health justice. And so one of the steps that we're currently looking at taking is bringing on a DEI intern within the sustainability office to help advise and lead that effort. And we've also had some discussions about having kind of a student stipend or scholarship in the future, where students could help lead this initiative and bring in their background and expertise to really guide that forward. So looks like I'm at close to time. At least I have a timer set. So I want to just pause there, and I'll actually just pass it back to Marilyn so that she can ensure that I know she has some specific questions, and then we can open it up to broader questions thereafter.
And we do have a little more time because this
Oh,
is
we do?
actually
Okay.
covering, well, it's covering 2 and 3. So we,
Oh, I see.
covers
Okay.
2 and 3. Yeah. So the questions that I have are, one I'm bringing from the group is, what role should ESC play? It seems obvious that the Environmental Stewardship Committee cares about how the university defines sustainability. So I'd like to hear people's thought about how ESC what role they should play. Should they play a vetting role? Do people from ESC want to be on the advisory group? And then also, what will be the process for formally adopting this? How will it be blessed by the university, and how will we look at our other sustainability actions and be sure they're aligned with the definition? So there's a bunch of questions out there that I'd love to hear people respond to.
Marilyn, this is Bruce. If ESC doesn't define a response sustainability, who does?
I mean, the goal, I guess, of our group is to come up with a definition that the university accepts with as much feedback as we can. Was that a rhetorical question, Bruce, or did you?
Well, partly. I mean, sustainability I agree, is a vague term. And I think we would be expected to come up with a working definition.
I would concur with Bruce. And also, I think we have to acknowledge at the outset that we have to realize that we're probably not going to please everybody with the definition, but it has to work for the university. So doing what you can, and even potentially leveraging more surveys or online surveys or online opportunities for input over an extended period of time as we refine this definition, I think would be in order.
And if I may chime in, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this group. I agree with the previous 2 comments. I think we have been in our college or our school, we have been having these discussions on sustainability definition. And when we listen across the board within only our school, the range of definition is truly humbling. And it can be a 20-page definition itself, and we are evolving. Like DEI that Kyle brought up wouldn't have been part of a sustainability discussion 2 years back. Today it is. Now, I think this definition, creating a definition problem is a bigger problem. Our project is a bigger problem than it is. And it's a chicken and egg. Should this group define sustainability for its baseline and then reach out, or just create an open discussion and then evolve into something that we like? So it is a big challenge, because sustainability definition can range and ranging from microclimate to bigger climate and all those. So I'll stop there, but I just wanted to raise that challenge and the exercise we have been having within our school and the challenges we have been facing.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So Marilyn, this is
I would
John.
ask that.
I have a suggestion, and that is that the group that you're leading take the lead on coming up with a draft. It can be engaged with ESC. ESC can look at it, provide feedback, ultimately the ESC can approve it, but I think then Lou needs to talk to Anamari and say, is this something the university wants to adapt? Is this something the regents want to be engaged with? And if they do, that can be a university policy. But I think having some common framework for the whole university is very valuable.
And how do we see this working? Let's say we're able to come up with this definition, which I agree seems super challenging. Then what? How do you see that? How do you see actioning that? There's some central group person that then makes judgment calls about whether something does or doesn't meet the definition, or how do you see that working?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean,
these are great points everyone's making, and appreciate the discussion. I think it's really useful. I always like to go back to the purpose behind why we do things. We decided that there was purpose behind establishing this as a target action to come up with a common definition. We saw that would be useful. I think it will be useful in aligning efforts of myriad of stakeholders across the university and outside the university towards making progress, real progress. I agree with John's point. I think it's up to us. We are the Environmental Stewardship Committee. We have passion, we have expertise on this committee. We need to take initiative as a committee to move in this direction. And but then I go back to purpose again. All right, so what? We come up with what we think is a good definition. Well, I think the purpose is we want to have influence. We want this definition to result in greater engagement, more activity, more progress. So I think along that line, it's nice for the ESC to recommend something or to define it, but we want influence. And so I agree that we would go to Anamari, we would go to the regents, we would brief this. And I think in doing that, what I would recommend that we do is for each element, climate, equity, many other things, we ought to, when we decide on a word or an element that should be in the definition, attached to that, there should be, here's what the purpose is of having equity in the definition. What do we want to achieve by doing that? And with that, we can go through and brief it and get the advocacy of university leadership, of our regents. And with that, assumedly, comes greater opportunity for us to influence progress.
But my question remains, Lou, let's just say we get to a definition, then what?
Yeah.
Well, how do people see using a definition?
Yeah, then I think we do use it as a measuring stick.
But so there's some group that's going through the course catalog and applying this criteria against this definition?
Well, I think, I don't know all the answers. I don't want to jump to
I think an alternative approach to think about would be don't overinvest in the definition. Come up with a very generic definition that is not particularly problematic, and then have people have to basically submit and say, fill out a one paragraph submission to say my course qualifies under the definition for these reasons.
Yeah.
And then somebody just reviews it, and just having the act of somebody having to make that assertion is going to be a self-selection process. And therefore, you'd almost give people a pass. If somebody feels like they can make the case, we're not going to spend a lot of time sorting out, well, no, you actually don't meet our definition because we don't consider social equity in this way. That just seems like an impossible, a fool's errand to try to do that. So I think about, rather than spending time on the definition, make it almost a self-selection process where we just push the work on, it's a sort of self-certification essentially, that you get a pretty easy pass if you're willing to go to the effort of filling out the one paragraph defense or whatever. Because to your point, purpose, I don't think the definition is going to drive change in and of itself. And so anyway, I think about less time on the definition and some other process that allows it to kind of get to the finish line quicker.
That is a really good point here. I do want to acknowledge a few folks that have had their hands up for a while. Jessica Kong, and then we'll move to Stuart.
Well, yeah, I wanted to build on top of this by saying that I do think it is worthwhile to consult scholars and experts within sustainability for what they think their definitions entail and encapsulate, and then to take those ideas and take as many of them as possible when designing coursework that is aimed at driving change.
Thank you, Jessica. Really good point. Stuart, did you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I wanted to address the process of developing the definition. I just put a point in the comment that the danger is if the definition is too narrowly constructed, it will be exclusionary. And if it's too broad, then it doesn't give a peg for people to hang their ideas onto. So there is something where we have to kind of strike a balance here. And in my experience, these very broad public processes of discussion just don't lead to anything firm enough to be very useful. I think the model that I would recommend that we would adopt, and I think this is what other people are saying too, is that we, as a committee, make an initial definition, put it out there for comment, then we hand it off to someone else and they do a stage of the process, then they hand it back to us. Something like that, where it goes private, public, private, public, private, public. Because then, you'll eventually settle on a definition. It may be a slow process, but you eventually settle on a definition that has enough structure to have public engagement and has been through a mill of being vetted for flexibility and inclusion. But at the same time, you have ideas coming out that are from private committee discussions, which often give you, I think, a richer set of ideas than just what comes from broad public request for comment. So I'm just thinking about the process mainly.
Yeah, I think you're making the same point Brian is making. Without process to declare, this meets the definition, we're not going to have, and it gets to the previous discussion on measuring numbers on whether or not we're making progress on engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And I see your comment here on, not being too narrow to exclude or too broad to inhibit real action.
Mm-hmm.
To Brian's point, let's come up with a definition that's broad and spend more time on the process for declaring this meets the mark of the definition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking lots of notes.
Yeah, so Marilyn and Kyle, any thoughts?
Sorry, Lou, I'm going to jump in again. I think if you establish a process, that's where you have value. So let's just say you have a generic definition and then people have to self-submit, okay? So let's say one department or a school has no submissions. Well, that's the start for a conversation with that dean or whatever. You have nothing related to sustainability? Oh, no, we think of this as sustainable. Okay, well, now you've started the conversation. Let's say another department that submits every single one of their courses they think is a sustainable conversation. Well, sustainable. Well, that's the subject for a conversation. So I just think the value is not so much in saying, yes, you've crossed a bright line here and you're sustainable related or not, but it's how do you engage a conversation that makes people more aware of this issue and how their coursework may or may not align with it. So I think we shouldn't get hung up on, a bright line definition as much as engaging and starting the conversation.
Yeah, I really like it. The trick is in getting people to think about it, to have a conversation. And with that, over time comes, if you think twice about something, you're probably going to be more likely to take action. So this furthers the conversation, and yeah, self-certifying, let's make it easy. But then it's easy to measure. We look at all the zeros, that requires us to engage. We look at those who go from 5 to 25 and celebrate it. At some point, maybe we look at the actual submissions and say, no, this doesn't really meet the mark. But that's a problem when we are extremely mature and we want to just get people engaged and aware. So I like it.
I think one thing that might be valuable when we're talking about like a process of evaluation is kind of coming up with questions or like key values that you want the definition or any sustainability work at UW to reflect. And then, you know, folks can submit a vast array of their work, and you can still use that process of talking with them and having a conversation. But if you come up with a few key questions, like how does your sustainability work reflect equity and inclusion values, or like questions like that, then you can have a conversation with them, but still be holding like the key values or that key part of your definition that you want in sustainability.
Excellent. Yeah. Go for it, Marilyn.
I'll throw out too that I've been involved in sustainability for a very long time and have thought about definitions of sustainability. But my thinking has been deepened so much by starting to read this literature. And I mean, it's been kind of a journey. And I think how, I would love to see everyone take this journey, but it's not a journey that happens when people, I've had all these many conversations with people about what is sustainability. And they haven't, there's working with fairly, I'll say superficial but superficial isn't quite the right word, because people have deep ideas behind their definitions, but there's a depth that has to happen or that can happen that goes beyond, even like, I like Brian's idea of having people say why their work meets a definition, but I hope we can figure out how to drive even deeper conversations by exposing people to ideas that might be completely outside what they were thinking before. That's a hard thing to do, but it's what comes to mind for me when I see what's happened to me as I've read these articles.
Yeah, I would just echo that, Marilyn, and Marilyn and I have had some great conversations about sustainability in the past, and I hear the comments in the chat from Alexa, and of course Brian's feedback. I think those are all super valid points and very valuable. We don't want to create a definition that then limits the fluidity of sustainability. I mean, sustainability is an ever-changing definition and field. And I put a comment in the chat, and I think I'll just re-emphasize that. I think, the events this summer, the racial justice protests and events this summer, I think have really unearthed a lot in regards to ways in which racial justice has not been acknowledged in so many different ways. And I think there's been a lot of conversation about that within the environmental and sustainability field as well. So I think there's a lot of depth there that we can explore. And I think through this faculty advisory group, to your point, Brian, about having those conversations with departments and letting them define that, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do with this faculty advisory group, is to sort of preempt those conversations and get them going now to create a more inclusive, network of community within UW that where we've opened those streams of dialogue and started to kind of hash out, what does this mean to you, as opposed to there being a continued vagueness around, does this apply to social work? Does this apply to, researchers looking at undocumented immigrant rights in the incarceration system? Is that sustainability or is it not? I think if we leave it ambiguous, then I think that is intrinsically exclusionary. I think now is a time to be really explicit. I think we've seen that with, again, the events this summer. We need to be really explicit about what our intentions are, as opposed to just being kind of like maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So I'll just add that in there. I think this is really an opportunity to be really clear about what we mean in terms of inclusion.
Yeah, that's well said, Kyle. Thank you. And I think Stuart made a similar comment in chat. Let's put it together though. Let's show a draft sooner than later, but and it can be explicit, and we can wordsmith it based on some commentary. But let's also at the same time work on the process, and not spend only all of our time on whether or not it's explicit enough. I think we can, there's a happy medium there that we can strike and move forward and make progress.
All right, well, we have a few minutes. This was a very hearty conversation on the chat as well as here online. It would be good to, so Kyle and Marilyn are both leading the targets 2 and 3. And for subsequent thoughts, questions on these topics, please direct them to Kyle and Marilyn, who will then share that with the working groups and faculty advisory groups that they're convening to have these discussions. So this is not going to be the last time we talk about it, clearly, but I do want to move us forward into talking about a different way of looking at what is considered, sustainability and not. Well, really more, it's now more operational. Any final thoughts, questions before we move us on to the next agenda item? Thank you, Bruce. And there are other comments in the chat box, so let's take a look at them. I saw Ben had one about maybe renaming the committee into Sustainability Committee in light of a definition framework topic. So that's something interesting that we may want to address again at the next meeting, at the next quarterly meeting. Okay. So we are ready to segue into kind of shifting into the next target, 5, with reducing carbon emissions through what we're doing on travel. And so Marilyn and Gary and Jeremy have been working on that. And then I've been working as a part of that group for the offsets development work. So Marilyn and Jeremy, or excuse me, Gary and Jeremy, if you're planning to speak, do you want to walk us through this status?
Right, I think I'm going to go first, and we're going to do a tag team. So we'll see how far 8 minutes go. I'm going to just frame things a little bit. Marilyn then is going to talk about the really important data collection, where I think we've made a lot of progress and have some specific challenges. Jeremy is going to talk about the all-important next steps, what we would like to move on to doing. I want to begin with what is an arguable claim that I want to lay out there. This is such a great target, I think, because it's so emblematic of some of the issues that I think lie at the core of environmental action generally. Professional air travel is an absolutely quantifiable item. You can find out very closely exactly what's involved. You can figure out the progress you're making on it. But it's one, unlike a lot of the other quantifiable targets, where the solution is not a matter of technology and or dollars, right? Figuring out what will work and finding the money to make that happen. Professional air travel constitutes, people have estimated this, 10 to 12% of our total emissions. If we don't address those in a big way, we're going to fall way short of the targets that we have. But it's not a matter of technology or dollars, it's a matter of behavioral change. Trying to tackle professional air travel involves going up against some of the most hard-baked ideas in academia about academic privilege, academic reward system, what people do and why they do it. It involves not just changing buildings, hard as that is, it involves changing the minds and behavior of hundreds or thousands of individual people who do all of the traveling. This, I think, is a fundamental issue for this committee and for the Sustainability Action Plan in general. Figuring out ways to deepen and widen what we do. There is across campus, I think, a lot of public awareness among faculty that, air travel may actually require a lot of, or produce a lot of carbon emissions, but moving people to change their behaviors is hard. On the other hand, we're at a really pivotal moment. COVID has changed the game. COVID has changed the game in terms of how people interact electronically and in virtual formats. So anyway, let me go ahead and just turn it over to Marilyn to talk about the data piece of this and trying to pull the numbers together.
Yeah, so we actually had a well-established process for accounting our professional travel that Rural Hammerschlag put together, and Elise Glassman worked with students to refine. So we have that in place. But as our group is talking, we've been realizing that we need more than just one number, so we can watch that number, that we want to engage, for example, with academic units and be able to reflect back to them their own data. So we're working at getting more refined data, and that hasn't been quite as easy as we would hope, but it feels like famous last words, we're getting very close to that. So we're working on getting data that we can tell a story with, that can then give us sort of leverage points for driving insights and behavior. And we've also started exploring to understand what we're missing. And I saw a note in the chat about academic travel. And I know we had the sense that was left out, but as we're asking for departmental data, we're seeing that there is some athletic data there. So, so we're making progress. And let's see, I'll pass it back on to Jeremy.
Great,
to talk
thanks.
about next steps.
Yeah, so connecting back to the themes of this is more a behavioral challenge than it is an engineering challenge. We have been thinking a lot about how to promote behavior change, whom to engage with this as our primary audiences, what are the right targets and benchmarks that we should be aiming for, what should the communication strategies be, and how can we ensure feedback and appropriate communication with the audiences that we identify. So the first major area here is audience identification and targeting, and we've talked about what the appropriate level for engagement is, whether it should be a school and thereby a dean, or a department and thereby a chair, or individual faculty and staff. And we've gotten feedback from people that it's probably faculty and staff level if we can, and departmental level after that. And so we're trying to, we'd like input from this group about that too, but trying to act on the input we've gotten so far to create a package of information that gives faculty and staff individually, and then also, that can be aggregated up as appropriate to departmental and school levels to feedback the information we've gathered about professional travel, as well as progress toward benchmarks and goals. We are working to figure out how to get the word out about this work and to avoid potential pitfalls like travel shaming and other things that might trigger some reflexive and perhaps vigorous resistance to this, and to leverage the moment we're in with COVID, where we've had dramatically reduced professional travel, maintained a fair amount of academic productivity in the context of that, but we recognize there's going to be a lot of pivoting toward resuming old travel patterns, and we'd like to influence that before they come roaring back. And then we also are thinking about alternatives to travel. So if, I'm part of the Department of Global Health, for instance, and global health has a lot of travel, and that's understandable. It's part of what they do. But might there be ways to reduce travel and continue to maintain, invest, and even deepen the relationships that used to be serviced by that travel through other kinds of targeted investment with places where Department of Global Health faculty go a lot. And so thinking about having that be part of the conversation that we're having with faculty and staff and department chairs. I think that covers it, but please, anybody on my committee, supplement as you see fit.
I can do a quick update on a related area for developing a high quality of carbon offsets in a voluntary way to allow for departments to offset their travel. So for instance, the Study Abroad Office actually reached out to us not too long ago as they have been thinking about their carbon footprint since their whole business model is based on sending people on airplanes. And they expressed their concern, just in terms of their wanting to do something about it as well. And apparently there's a whole industry with study abroad kind of programs looking at this particular issue. The work actually is taking the continuation of some prior work that the Environmental Stewardship Committee commissioned 3 years ago in looking at what a carbon offset would be for the University of Washington for the purposes of potentially offsetting, travel emissions. And there was a RFP completed last year and identified a vendor broker that would be able to work with the university. And so we're actually more in a administrative process right now and looking at what an agreement would look like should we work with them. And that firm's name is Act Commodities. And so they are a trader of carbon offsets and various, our RFP was developed through procurement, and we had Roel Hammerschlag to help us ensure that we're looking at the right type of offsets to put out for the solicitation. And so we are looking at identifying what the main agreement service levels are so that we can have that available for departments to participate in. We're looking at sometime next year. So we're in December, we're trying to get a little bit more of the administrative paperwork done, button that up. And then there's going to be some more communications, hopefully at our next Environmental Stewardship Committee meeting about what that program will start looking like. So this is just kind of a tail piece of this Target 5 for the plan. And I'm happy to answer any questions. We have procurement, facilities, and 2 grad students looking at doing the work, as well as the group with Jeremy and Gary and Marilyn also being part of this effort, because we're going to need that data information to even identify how much would be potentially purchased. So a lot more work to be done, but I just wanted to share that status.
I see a question from Stuart that I'd like to respond to. It's a good question. And again, part of what we've been trying to do is pull together work that's already been done, but has remained kind of dispersed and not yet integrated. So there was pretty recently, about 3 years ago, a report also done in part by POE students working with Roel about motivations for professional travel. They did surveys of faculty. They've done a whole lot of this work, right? We could go back and redo it again. I don't know, it would look very different from a couple of years ago, right? And so it's more a question of trying to actually implement that. But all of us who are faculty members, staff too, know that, the prestige and reward system is deeply tied to how visible you are. And that is tied to how much you travel and where you get seen and how often, right? And until we can use technology and to get people to buy into the technology that they need to use to change that, that's not going to change very much. NSF grants, I've been told, for instance, oblige you to do flying, right? To go to conferences to present your work. That's hard baked into the system.
Alan also asked a really good question about just one vendor. So the RFP did go through a fairly selective process. So Tony, I think you were also on that committee, the RFP committee. Do you want to talk about that? Just in quick recap.
Well, I think that, you know, we went through a very thoughtful process on that. Again, you know, here we are with COVID and you know, not traveling at all. We have many staff and faculty and students that are home now, you know, where, you know, we may not, and the good thing is that, you know, we may not use that opportunity, but we also, you know, went through the purchasing process for the offsets themselves. I think that, you know, we're going to end up, you know, with a new normal. Thinking about COVID, you know, there are some people that just loved to go ahead and stay home. And I was really concerned because, you know, technically going to a conference, you know, it just wasn't there virtually. And now, you know, I've attended 2 or 3 different conferences where they've been wonderful. And I still get off to the side. I could go ahead if Gary's there. I want to go ahead and talk to Gary. I can go ahead and still face-to-face talk to him about one thing or another. We could pull off to the side. There are so many things that have changed. You're going to end up with some people that have to go and it's required for them to go physically. But I think that there's going to be a lot of changes that we may not even need to purchase these offsets. And I really appreciated the thoughtfulness that we went through in order to go ahead and go through the RFP. But with COVID, you know, if there's any good things about it, I think that it's going to have us second guess, do we need to go to these conferences? Do we need to travel? And also it's going to reduce the commute, you know, to campus. When some people say, I love working from home and it's just great. Others, they certainly, you know, they miss it. It's isolating. Their houses are small and they want to come to work. But I think that I think that we have this opportunity not to use this purchases of these offsets.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, is that this would be the last resort, you know, so hoping that we have, you know, the behavior change and awareness, and COVID has taught us what we can do and really making us rethink about why we do, you know, again, and so Bruce had some really good commentaries there in terms of grant funded travel, because a lot of the travel is related to grant funding and money. So that's something that we need to include into the process as well, and some conversations and engaging with the departments for input. And Ben, to kind of looking at what they, but people's travel plans for 2021. I mean, we all love to go to different places. Travel may not be like top, but we want to be somewhere else soon, right? So that'll be, I think we should keep our eye to that. Certainly. And lastly, I do want to mention that with the offsets programming, this is not something that's just one and done. It's going to be a consultative process with this committee and obviously the key stakeholders, and ensuring the right reviews and vetting. But we're still not even at that point where we know what we're wanting yet. So there's going to be more opportunity to get your input. So we're at about the time to segue. This has been really great. It seems like the more we go, the quicker time goes, doesn't it? Or maybe it's me, I don't know. So George and Karine are going to talk about our commute reduction to campus, and congratulations to them on leading UW and the recent recognition by ASHE as the top performer in transportation. So.
Thanks, Claudia. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I'm Corinne Walline. I'm the Commute Options and Planning Manager for UW Transportation Services for the Seattle campus. And I'm joined by George Donegan, who is our Assistant Director of Business Mobility. And so today we want to talk to you about our progress for Target 7. The goal for Target 7 is a 12% or lower drive alone rate by 2028. This target was set through the 2019 campus master plan to support continued development on the Seattle campus. I did want to acknowledge that this goal is specific for the Seattle campus, but there are additional goals related to vehicle trip reduction and promotion of sustainable transportation modes at UW Bothell and UW Tacoma as well. And so we will bring those to you the next time we meet with you. For the Seattle campus, we really focused our work plan for FY21 on promoting commute options towards SOV reduction and also promoting car share and UW shuttle service. So I'll talk about the first action item and then I'll turn it over to George to talk about our second action item. So as you see as our baseline metric, as of our last annual transportation survey that we conducted for the Seattle campus, which was in autumn of 2019, we have a drive alone rate of 18.2. In order for us to get down to that goal of a 12% over the next 8 years, we know that we're really going to have to take a targeted approach to understanding the needs and challenges that are faced by our commuters that are driving alone to campus to be able to provide strategies that will encourage them to use sustainable modes moving forward. And so in order to better understand what those needs are, Transportation Services conducted a transportation needs assessment of our campus community, which included students, staff, and faculty over the past few months. And that's to help us better understand what are the motivations and barriers for people using sustainable transportation modes to campus. We were also given the opportunity, given the timing of this survey, to also be able to take a look at what is going to be the impact of COVID on people's commute behavior and how they look at different modes coming to campus, specifically around concerns with health and safety for using modes like transit or ride sharing to campus. So we were able, as part of this transportation needs assessment, to ask people what were they doing pre-COVID, what are they doing currently if they are coming to campus, and then what do they anticipate that they'll be doing once we return to typical operations. So we received over 1,200 responses to the survey, and we're trying to gather all of that information and put it into a final report. We also had about 150 participants that continued in the process to provide some supplemental data that we did through an online community, online focus group system, and that gave us an opportunity to gather more qualitative data on commute behavior. We have about 9 activities that we did that went into a little bit more depth about motivations, barriers, future transportation modes like light rail, and how that'll impact people's behavior moving forward. So now that we've gathered all of this information over the next quarter, we're planning to finalize that report of our findings and then use that to begin developing a campus transportation plan that will set specific mode targets for transportation services as we are developing strategies moving forward to encourage sustainable transportation modes and be able to increase the use of those modes moving forward. So we really understand where is our best opportunity and return on investment as far as reaching different sustainable commuting behavior. So that's where we are right now with the first action, and then I'll turn it over to George to talk about our progress on actions too.
All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is George Donnigan. I'm the Assistant Director for Business Mobility. I'm responsible for the fleet and shuttles. Currently have, well, at the start of our fiscal year, we had 697 vehicles in our fleet. Originally, we started with about 115 vehicles in our UCAR program. So first, I'd like to start off with just what we've done during COVID and the impacts of COVID, both on the fleet and shuttles operations. So during the COVID pandemic, we've increased our cleaning protocols for our shuttle operations to provide safety for the people that are currently riding those shuttles for the Health Science Express, SECA, SLU, and our Dollar Ride programs. We also clean every UCAR that is in use as we have reservations. We have seen a substantial reduction in UCAR reservations since the pandemic started. We're down about 75%. What that has meant is we have reallocated 9% of our UCAR fleet, we've reduced our UCAR fleet by 9%. And some of those vehicles have actually been surplus, and some of those vehicles have actually been reallocated to assigned clients based on additional needs, for example, in the lab medicine division and in facilities during the pandemic. In shuttles, we've modified our operations, so we're running less shuttles to save some money based on reduced ridership. We're only seeing about 20% of normal ridership that we had pre-COVID. And at this standpoint, that's been fairly stable over the last 8 to 12 weeks. So we're really just holding on until we get to a vaccine and to get back to normal operations. In preparation for our post-COVID or our next era, I should say, is I am conducting a circulator study to help promote maybe inter-campus circulation. So I've developed 3 different routes that would service 3 different parts of the campus. And I'm preparing a financial analysis for facilities to review a potential cost of providing basically a circulator campus in the east part of campus, central part of campus, and west part of campus. So any questions on those?
George, you didn't mention South Campus. We got a lot of people who work there, many of whom come to Upper Campus. Is there a plan to include them?
The East Campus would go to the south part of campus, going from the east parking lots, the E lots to the South Campus, and also the Central Campus would go around Stevens Way. So yes, they would touch all parts of campus. So thank you for that correction, Bruce.
And I saw
I had more of a general question. So first off, thank you. You guys got a lot of great work underway. Really appreciate the hard work. That's exciting. So I'm just making sure I'm tracking the big picture here. So we're currently at 18% SOV. We want to get to 12 by 2028. Do I have it right that you're kind of entering like a year-ish of planning to figure out how we're going to achieve the goal? And then after that year, you'll start to see, so for the next cycle of the, Claudia, for the next cycle of the action plans, we would start to see actual actions that you would think would confidently lead us to get that 6% reduction?
I mean, that Corinne and George, that would be around spring or?
Yeah, so what we're looking for is to have a plan in place by spring that will start to have actions that will definitely be included in the next version of the sustainability action plan. And just to mention, Brian, we have a lot of strategies that are already in place on our campus. We have our UPass program, which is a significant benefit to students, staff, and faculty on campus. We have a number of strategies related to biking and rideshare. So we're really trying to look at what are those strategies that are going to take us to that next level. So we feel like we've really hit the people that are quote unquote low hanging fruit that are going to use sustainable transportation modes. So we're really using this process to understand of the people who are still driving alone to campus, what are those challenges that aren't met by just the strategies that we've already taken into account. So a lot of the things that we see as part of this process and the strategies that we will be developing is really focusing on some of those underserved groups that are having to drive alone now and figuring out how can we provide strategies that will help them be able to use sustainable modes moving forward.
Gotcha, thank you. So Claudia, going forward, one of the things I've struggled with on our current version of the scorecard, so this is just for consideration later, we've got a goal here, right? And just on an executive committee, I'd like to be able to say, hey, are we on track for the goal or not? So if in this case, I look at it and I say, well, we got a green check mark and a yellow indicator, but really those, if I'm understanding, those are sort of interim planning stoplights. And so I don't have a way in this case to kind of quickly assess, hey, gee, we think we can make this or not. And therefore, if it's a red, that's something that would really draw my attention. So anyway, future versions, we might think about a way to format this that sort of gives an indicator of where we are towards actually meeting our metric, because that's where, if we got areas like that were red, that's where the executive committee should really be focusing. So I think there's a lot of good formatting here, but just think about how we might capture, again, our confidence of actually meeting the goal given our current plans.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Brian. And I think as part of that transportation plan that we're developing, as I mentioned, we'll be setting specific mode targets. So how many trips we want to move into bicycling versus transit versus rideshare. And I think that would be a good indicator on this dashboard as well, as far as how are we doing as far as those targets.
Great. I mean, what's your own handicapping? Are we gonna meet a 12% goal if you had to, bet your next lunch money?
I don't want anyone betting their lunch money, but I think we'll definitely revise this so that there's a little bit more honed in under the hood metrics so that you can gauge, yes, okay, and not okay.
But Corinne, what do you think? You think you have a good shot at it?
I would say that's a very aggressive goal that we were given by the city.
Okay, so see, that's important information, right? That we got an aggressive goal. And so that's for me as executive committee discussion territory is, okay, if we got an aggressive goal, are we being aggressive enough, or should we throw in the towel and put our energies elsewhere? So, that's what I'd love to hear from owners in these areas of, hey, I think we got a shot at this if I get support in this area, or no, I think we're just fooling ourselves. We're not going to make this. So anyway, thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, let me add to that. That's why I love the format of this report. We have challenges and risks detailed, and the intent is to put things like that right in there. Maybe it's a little bit early to be declaring that, hey, I don't think we have a shot at getting to 12%. No. I don't think we're there. A year from now, we may be kind of there, and I don't want to put a timeline on anything, so whatever. But at the point that we feel like we've got big hurdles in our way that are going to inhibit us from meeting the goal, this is one where we've got responsibility here, and we need to mitigate risk ahead of time, and not 6 months before the deadline, but 6 years before the deadline or 3 years before the deadline. I would like to be messaging to the powers that be that here's what we're doing. We've been active. Here's what we're going to continue to do. We don't think we can get anywhere near 12%. We're probably going to be around 15%, whatever that is, so that we can establish a dialogue and mitigate risks that may come from, notifying people at the last minute. That would not be good.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Lou. And that's definitely one of the reasons that we are going through this planning process now, is so that we can identify those strategies and be able to, as we move forward towards 2028, really understand where we're at and what's getting the return on investment that we need in order to get towards that goal. And then I did just want to note that Brenda had a question in the chat that I wanted to make sure that we addressed. So in the commute survey, we did include staff from the medical center, and we are able to filter that by where they're located on campus and job classification as well. So we'll be able to filter out that information so that we understand the needs of different groups on campus as well.
All right, thank you. And I would be curious to see maybe how that will be impacted through continued telework, assuming that we'll have a portion of staff and still going to be doing that even after the vaccine.
Yeah.
And Gary had one more question here, and I think Tony had a comment, and then we'll go ahead and begin to wrap up.
Yeah, Gary, so in terms of carbon emissions, distance does matter as much as the number of vehicles that are coming to campus. And we do have a vehicle miles traveled goal as well as part of our Washington State commute trip reduction program. So that is something that we are tracking as well in our annual transportation survey, as well as the work that we just did with the needs assessment. So I think that's a good point, and we should add that moving forward to the baseline metrics so you guys can understand that element and how it fits into this as well.
A quick note on our global warming emission, our GHG emissions modeling. We generally don't use distance, we use time, because time is a bigger factor, travel time in GHG emissions as compared to distance. So. given the traffic in Seattle.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so we have a few minutes. I know some folks have a hard stop at 10:30. May I ask Brenda to chime in here? I just want to provide the floor to Brenda to share a quick update on just some good stuff they're working on at the medical center. Brenda, are you still on?
I am still here, and I just wanted to share that UW Medicine signed the Healthcare Climate Challenge pledge back in February. This is a pledge that Healthcare Without Harm put out into the atmosphere a few years ago. I'm not even sure how long ago, but currently there are 200 participants that represent 22,000 hospitals and health centers in 33 countries around the world. And we found out this last week that UW Medicine received the 2020 Silver Climate Leadership Award from the Healthcare Climate Challenge. So I just wanted to share that really good news.
Thank you, Brenda. That's amazing. So everyone's nodding and thumbs up and hurrahs. If you could, we'll share the link. I think you sent it to Damon and I, and we'll share that with the notes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. All the different things happening. All right, so in the last couple of minutes, John and Lou, if I could request either of you to close us and conclude and adjourn the meeting.
I want to thank everyone for coming today. I think this was a great conversation. We're still moving forward. And as Lou said, we'll revisit these targets in the winter quarter and the spring quarter. I want to wish everyone a happy holiday and look forward to reconvening. I think Lou said our next meeting is in February. So thank you all very much for today.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Ditto. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. On time.
Awesome job.